So welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 157, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Sara Mauskopf, who's a co-founder and CEO of Winnie. So Winnie is a marketplace that makes it easy for parents to discover trusted childcare providers nearby. Winnie is used by millions of parents across the US and is also backed by top investors like Homebrew. So before starting Winnie, Sara led product at Postmates, so she has some really great marketplace experience. Sara was also an early group chat guest, so this is great to have her join us again. And we started things off by Sara sharing some of her key learnings from Postmates. We did a quick refresher on the founding story and first steps for starting Winnie, got to learn more about how it's evolved, the recent growth, and we also had a great group Q&A. I really enjoyed this conversation, and you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So, Sara, welcome back. And it's been a while since you first joined us as a group chat guest. I believe it's almost 3 years now. So I'm really excited to have you join us here today. And I would like to start off by saying a huge thanks for taking the time to do so in advance. So before we really dive into the latest with Winnie, I think it might be great if you can start off by briefly sharing your background as a quick refresher, and also for those that might not know you.
Yeah. Hi, I'm so excited to be back. This is the best marketplace community, maybe the only marketplace community, but definitely the best. So I'm Sara Mauskopf. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Winnie, which is a childcare marketplace that I'm sure we'll talk about. I have been doing this now for over 8 years, which is insane. Though we didn't start off as a childcare marketplace, so it's a little bit of a new evolution of the business in like the past 5 years or so. Before that, I was at Postmates, which is now part of Uber Eats, but it's an on-demand delivery marketplace. And before that, I was at Twitter, RIP, now it's called X, and Google before that. And my career, like when I was not running my own company, I was a product manager. So that's kind of my background. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really great background. And of course, so much that we're going to get into here. So I wanted to go back to Postmates, since that's a marketplace that we all know of and has also paved the way for many of us. So what were some of your key learnings from leading product there, and maybe even specific to it as a marketplace that you've taken with you to starting Winnie?
Yeah. So when I was at Postmates, it was not just focused on food delivery. It was sort of still like finding its place in the world. And it was just like an on-demand delivery. You could get delivery from anywhere. And at the time when I started there, they didn't have any kind of merchant partnerships. So it was, you could get delivery from any store, but Postmates didn't partner with the store. You would just tell your courier, your Postmate, to show up there, and you tell them what to get and they'd bring it to you. And then over time and during the course of my time there, Postmates started focusing a lot more on food delivery and then forming these merchant partnerships with the restaurants, so that Postmates could get the menus, and that, you wouldn't just have a courier show up and then be waiting after placing an order for food. And it was such a long wait. You'd actually send the order to the restaurant in advance of the courier showing up. So it's a lot more efficient. But my biggest takeaway from that was like, you didn't need those merchant partnerships to get started. Sure, it was certainly a nice addition and made the product a lot better. But Postmates was able to build a huge base of users and then kind of find its place in food delivery, sort of because they just got started by kind of faking the supply side, and just saying, you get delivery from anywhere, and then seeing where users actually cared about and then building the partnerships there and then focusing there. So we kind of, I think, maybe subconsciously took that learning into Winnie, because with marketplaces, as I'm sure you all know, like it's very hard to start both sides at the same time. And so, that learning that like you could kind of, if you can be creative about sort of faking one of the sides and get the other one really going, then it's easier to then bring on the other side.
No, certainly. And that's a great transition, right into Winnie. But I guess, going back to the very beginning, what was the founding story for Winnie, and what were the first steps that you actually took to start it as a marketplace?
The founding story is a little bit convoluted because we started with an idea that did not have product market fit and then eventually pivoted into childcare. But started Winnie. Well, I had my first daughter when I was at Postmates, and kind of went back to work, and like many new parents, realized how challenging it was to be a working parent, and then really wanted to build something kind of in the parenting space. Um, and we didn't know, I hooked up with another woman I was working with, Anne, who's now my co-founder, and she was also a new mom and excited to build something in the parenting space. So we were just like, let's build something for parents. And we're both builders, like product, and we both like to code. And so we just went straight to building, which, in retrospect, I wish I would have been a little more thoughtful about what we were building. But we built this app for like parents to find places to go with their kids, which didn't have product market fit. It didn't make any money. Eventually, we pivoted away from that into childcare. And it was, when we just did a presentation to our company about the original version of the app, and it was like so embarrassing. I was just cringing the whole time. So that part of it is like, the like not successful part I try to hide away. But it did show us that like childcare was a big need, because we built this app that we thought people would be using to find fun places to go with their kids, and everyone was using it to try to find childcare, which we didn't even have in our app. And we were like, oh, maybe childcare is important. And so we pivoted into, what Winnie is today, which is a marketplace to find mostly group licensed care. So think daycare, preschool, not babysitters or nannies, but like an actual physical building you go to and take your kids where they're with other kids and a teacher.
And that's a really cool founding story. So you mentioned as far as, the pivot and, one of the things that we don't talk about a lot is, the journey to kind of finding product market fit. And sometimes, not only just one pivot, but sometimes multiple along the way. So could you kind of like walk us through, what that experience was like, and like some of those kind of insights that led to kind of finding product market fit were?
Yeah, I wish I could say like, we just knew we didn't have product market fit, and then we had this aha moment and we figured it out. But it was more like we were sort of irrationally, believed in our original idea, to the point of like trying to force it to have product market fit. We did a lot of like these kind of growth hacks where we would get users and we'd be like, look, it's growing. People really like this app to find places and things to do with your kids. But the truth is, like, it wasn't making money. It wasn't growing fast enough to be like a free social app. And so it was just in this kind of like dead zone, where companies go to die. And it was very gradual, where we started seeing the data of parents using our app to try to search for childcare. And then it was actually a weekend that my co-founder, Anne, decided to look at the California state childcare licensing database, and then pull in every daycare and preschool in San Francisco, where we lived, and just build a website that like listed them all. So it was a really crappy website. It was just San Francisco, and she built it in a weekend, and then she like put it in a mother's group. And I was like, Anne, like, why are you doing this? This is dumb. And she's like, oh, it's another one of these growth hacks. We'll get people to use this, and then they'll download our app and they'll love all the other things we do. But it turns out that was the thing. It wasn't a growth hack. It was the whole product. And we kind of saw really quickly after we shared it in that mother's group that like we had been sharing in that same mother's group, like all the things we were building, and our posts would always get ignored or like blocked. This is the first time like people were commenting and they were like, oh, thanks so much. Like, I have my own spreadsheet of daycares, like check this one out and look at all the info I collected. And we were like, oh, I think we're on to something here, kind of hit a nerve. And so we, then did it for the rest of California, which was pretty easy after we did San Francisco. And we started to see not only were people using our website with all the daycares and preschools, but we started getting some SEO traffic, which is now a major part of our business. And so we were like, okay, this is kind of a sort of product market fit we hadn't felt with our other thing. And I kind of like describe it as like, you don't know like when you don't have product market fit necessarily, but when you have it, you kind of are like, oh, this is it. That other thing was not it. This is it.
Certainly a great point, relatable to many here. So I guess, since Winnie sounds like a somewhat kind of local marketplace in nature, at that point in time, you mentioned being in San Francisco. Did you kind of constrain markets to kind of build up liquidity or?
No, not real. Like I think that's like the common technique is like you start really small and you make sure you have really good kind of supply dynamic, demand dynamics, and then you go bigger. Because our thing was like a data import, we kind of moved quickly to do it state by state. Um, and VCs don't really love this. They're like, what do you mean you did this for every state? And we're like, well, we have an SEO play here. So we want to kind of be first in getting this data and building up kind of our domain authority. And because we didn't need the providers on the other side in the beginning, and it was just kind of this utility, this directory, we could just kind of do it ourselves everywhere. But as we have kind of focused on bringing the providers on, which is now our entire business, like it's the daycares and preschools who pay us. We're not a transactional marketplace. We're kind of a lead gen based marketplace. So we do focus more now on like there are specific areas where we know we have low liquidity and we want to get more suppliers on in those areas. But in the beginning, we were just like, let's go everywhere really quickly. US only, but
Yeah, you mentioned a few different topics that we definitely want to get into as far as being like non-transactional in nature. But I guess it might be helpful. Can you give us like a kind of like a high-level overview of Winnie today, and maybe just kind of like walking us through what that experience is like on each side?
yeah, so it's still daycare and preschool is still like our bread and butter. That's where we're the strongest. So think like group childcare for kids age 0 to 5. Parents come to Winnie.com or they find us like through a Google search. They'll be searching for like best preschools in Burlingame, and then they kind of land on a Winnie search results page that way. They put in their zip code, the age of their kids, and then they see the list of daycares and preschools that meet their criteria, and they can apply all different filters, curriculum and languages spoken and hours and prices and all that good stuff. And then when they find places that they're interested in, they can fill out a contact form to contact the provider. And then the rest is kind of off platform. So like scheduling a tour and ultimately enrolling in the daycare, that all happens off Winnie. So we're very much that like initial matchmaking platform. And we've since kind of expanded to things like summer camp and after school care. We've even added tutoring this year. So trying to kind of broaden our market beyond just daycare and preschool, but that's still kind of what we're best known for.
On that note, as far as when it comes to kind of category expansion, so how have you thought about that, and what does that kind of like expansion playbook look like?
Yeah, so for us, we've started with so we have customers now, the people who pay us for parent leads, essentially. And we've looked at like, well, what other services do they offer? So like a big daycare center might also offer after school care for school age kids. And so it's easy to sort of add on that service because we already have the customer, the way to monetize it. And so after school care and summer camps were both things that like a lot of our existing customers already offered, as well as like private kindergarten. So we look at it that way. We also look at like, well, are there kind of big partnerships we can do in a vertical and kind of get a lot of sort of monetized locations is how we think about it. So for tutoring, we did like a couple big tutoring partnerships, Sylvan, Mathnasium, where they're, really big players with lots of locations across the United States. And so we can start to build out that vertical with just 2 customers and add more over time that are kind of smaller and fill in different regional areas. So that's kind of like another way we've sort of prioritized verticals. And then also, what is the demand actually searching for, where we can sort of resell our existing parents. So we actually do have like some babysitting agencies Uh, because what we find is like people who need daycare and preschool like also can use babysitters, and so we can kind of advertise them to our current demand, even though it's a little different from the kind of brick and mortar businesses.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're essentially like not having to kind of reacquire, whether it's like supply or demand, kind of typically with the expansion.
Yeah, we're trying to like, where can we kind of get a head start? And then of course you have to reacquire, all the fill in all the gaps, and it's, you have to kind of look at it regionally too. And there's lots of small local players, but like where can we get like a nice head start to get in there and then kind of fill in the rest?
Yeah, yeah. And then another point that I wanted to kind of bring up as far as, I would say like kind of like lead-based marketplaces, like one of the challenges that some, face, and we're a lot of times kind of discussing it with early stage founders here, which is like, like the quality of leads and kind of being able to like close the loop on that. So are there any maybe like learnings from that you could share with us?
Yeah, I think that's the hardest problem we face is like proving out our lead quality. Uh, our leads are typically higher quality than leads you can get elsewhere just because we are kind of dedicated to childcare. So parents, by the time they get to Winnie, they're pretty high intent. Um, but if we don't get credit for the quality of those leads, then our leads just look more expensive. And it's like, well, why would I get leads from you? I can get them on Facebook for cheaper and there's more. And it's like, well, those leads are never going to convert because they just click through on some random ad, but they're not actually deep in their search and ready to enroll. Um, so for us, we've really had to, one, like partner with kind of the CRMs that people use to kind of act on their leads and make sure we're pulling in the data from those CRMs and showing them like, here's how all your channels are performing. We're trying to kind of do that in a more automated way in their Winnie dashboards so people actually start getting these analytics themselves without us having to like describe everything to them. But a lot of the smaller players don't even use a CRM, and so they just have no idea. So it's kind of a big challenge for us is to help them kind of understand why they need to be tracking this in the first place. Especially to like a lot of the smaller daycares and preschools, they're just not tech savvy. Like they're amazing educators and that's what they should be and great at caring for kids, but they're not like marketing experts.
Yeah, and now on that note too, I mean, do you find it like somewhat challenging kind of building, tech for like in this space and kind of being innovative?
Yeah. I mean, it's sometimes frustrating because the space is a little bit slower moving than we move. We're like, we want to experiment, try new things and roll stuff out. And like, it's like a lot of these businesses are really old school in how they do things. Um, I would say like COVID definitely helped. Like, I think without COVID, we might not still be around today because it kind of moved everyone online. Um, and I think businesses that couldn't make that move closed down. So I think it just increased the kind of tech savviness of our customers. But yeah, I mean, it's probably our biggest challenge is like the parent users that we build for, like, super high tech and like they get it and they have really high expectations of how a product should work and behave and perform. But like the other side of the equation doesn't necessarily really use tech in their business.
Certainly are relatable to many here. So you mentioned before, as far as Winnie has definitely evolved quite a bit, and it sounds like you've entered like a new stage of growth for the company. So are there any maybe like more recent kind of challenges or learnings?
So we are now a profitable business, which is exciting. Like I think in the beginning we raised venture capital and we were burning lots of money, and now we are all about like let's not spend more than we're making. So that's exciting in that we kind of control our destiny, but it's also a big challenge because we can't just do things that aren't going to pay off kind of immediately. And it's a challenge to balance like things we know we want to build for the future with, we have to maintain our profitability, and we have a very small team.
So that's definitely going to lead to some questions here during the Q&A, I bet. So, which speaking of, we're going to get to here in a little bit. Otherwise, you and I could just, go on for quite some time diving into things. But, I did have, one last note as far as, you mentioned fundraising. So you, of course, have some pretty awesome investors on board. So, for instance, Homebrew. So, what has the fundraising journey been like?
Yeah. So it's gone through many iterations. I think the market has also really evolved. In the beginning, when we got started in 2016, I think it was people were willing to give us money on just a deck, not even a deck. It was, we said we were starting a company, and people who had worked with us in the past and investors who had, Homebrew had been our bosses in the past, and we're just sure, have some money. Maybe that still happens at the pre-seed, but I think it's not as common anymore to just get, that initial round thrown at you. But I also it almost handicapped us in a way where we kind of thought everything would be that easy then. And it wasn't necessarily a good thing because the subsequent rounds were a lot harder. People were expecting, to see traction and to see monetization. We didn't have that. So the kind of, we then raised a seed round. We then raised a Series A. And that was sort of on very early revenue. I don't think we had the traditional Series A revenue metrics back in, 2018, 2019 when we raised that. And then, after that, we had kind of taken in a good amount of money and pretty diluted, didn't have a lot of revenue. So we just really focused on making money at that point, kind of making up for lost time. And we did raise a little bit more money on a note during that really frothy time when everyone was just throwing money for, nothing. And I'm glad we did, because otherwise we'd be out of money. But we've really tried to make that last and kind of put that in the bank and not touch it, and just be really focused on profitability. And I think it's led to I feared, oh my God, we'd be at odds. We'd build things that were just making us rich, and it was at the expense of our users. No, it actually forces us to build only the things that our customers absolutely need and want and will pay for, and none of the other crap that we were doing. So it has been, I'm sure there will be conflicts in the future, but we have not run into them yet. It has truly been the best forcing function for us. So, our investors now ask, when are you going to raise your next round? And I really don't want to, because I think it's such a distraction from building. And I would rather raise by building the things that will make our customers' businesses bigger so they pay us more money.
No, I'm really glad you mentioned this. These are the type of things that we need to hear here as founders. So cool. Hey, we're gonna jump into questions. Olivia, do you want to come on? And then we'll try to get to you after Dimitri.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Mike. And thanks so much, Sarah, for sharing a little bit about your journey. I was curious and wondering if you could talk a little bit about, how you think about trust and safety, or even kind of qualifying the supply side. So I'm not sure if this is applicable, but do you do background checks on the providers? And then if so, which side pays for the cost?
Yeah, so this is part of the reason why we have never gone into individual nannies or babysitters, and we only work with licensed daycares, because at least we know that the providers are background checked, that they're regularly inspected. We still have a lot of incidents, but there's some level of trust and safety, but we still regularly monitor, licenses can get revoked. We have a monitor set up where if a page starts getting a lot of views on Winnie, it's typically because it's in the news, and usually not for a great reason. And so that kind of immediately gets flagged and taken down or looked at, because we, a lot of times, the license is probably still active at that point. But if we see a news story come out where something is being investigated or something's happening, like we typically take that page down just to be on the safe side. It used to be our philosophy where we were like, well, we're just a marketplace. It doesn't matter. Like we're not saying any of these places are safe. And we realized like, no, like if we're putting a website up for these pages, like we are, vouching for them, whether we think we are or not. And people will take that as a sign that it is in some way legit. And so we have to be kind of extra careful. We also will sometimes get reviews. We'll see the reviews come in like before there's been a news article or been press. So we just typically err on the side of safety and like taking stuff down. But the nice thing is they all do have that like licensing backing it. So, if we take it down and then we see like actually it was not a warranted like it was investigated and then they decided that business could remain licensed or whatever, like we can always put the page back up.
Cool. Hey, Sarah, I actually had a question for you that a founder posted in the community and wanted me to ask, which was on team building and hiring, and it sounds like your co-founder, you and your co-founder have some really great marketplace experience and product. So do you kind of look for marketplace experience specifically when hiring?
No, I think it depends on the role. Like typically we look more for like the individual kind of role expertise. And then I think with any startup, just like the ability to wear multiple hats. And we've found just over time that people who can do more than one thing or who are willing to do more than one thing tend to be people that do better at Winnie and like also enjoy the job more, because inevitably like people have to stretch beyond the thing that they're hired for. So I think that kind of flexibility, willingness to try new things and learn on the job, and like that has been kind of the most important characteristic. And then like, kind of expertise in the thing that we need them to be doing, because there's not necessarily someone to learn from. Like I have no idea for a lot, like I can't teach someone to be a better engineer. So we really need people who can be self-starters and like also be kind of the best in their area.
That's going to be super helpful. So we have lots of founders and teams here kind of making early hires. Cool. Hey, Dimitri, do you want to come on? So you send me a message and raise your hand.
I have a question about this kind of sponsored search listings that you have on Winnie.
Yes.
So marketplace frequently get this advice is that you shouldn't pursue this kind of source of revenue until you have kind of very high traffic, which is usually requires kind of a high frequency of visits.
Yeah.
Your sound like yours is like a low frequency marketplace, because this is kind of a not a choice that you make, twice a week.
Yes.
So I'm curious, kind of what was your thought process for when the right time to introduce that was, and also why you're only letting like the kind of care.com versus everybody participate in the sponsored search, unless I misunderstood what you were.
Yeah. So you found probably a low monetization market where we do let care.com advertise. They're sort of one of these nanny agencies that I've talked about, which is sort of like adjacent to what we're doing. But what we found is in like places where we don't have a good daycare preschool result, we can show care.com or Sitter City or another kind of nanny babysitter agency and kind of monetize an area we don't otherwise monetize. So that's where they show up. As far as like the daycare and preschool sponsored or verified pages that show up at the top of results, I mean, for us, those aren't random ads. Those are like literally the daycares that are probably most likely to respond and have open spaces. So they're also kind of the best result. And we charge a lot of money. Like it's not a pay-per-click, it's a pay-per-lead model. So we charge a lot for those leads because they're very highly qualified. So I would say like we haven't done, let's show some random baby food company at the top of search results, because that I think would be really low kind of CPM or CPC. And we don't have the kind of massive traffic to make that work. But these kind of like very expensive ads, which is kind of what they are, do make sense because like we, you know, a lead is a very kind of expensive, like you can almost think of it like a purchase. We're just proxying sort of the transaction.
Great.
Good question. Is it Ming?
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for joining us and sharing everything. I was curious if you can share more about like the early days. You talked about like the pivot. And kind of like a more kind of practical question is like, where you were like in those groups and trying to find your first, like, let's say 10 customers, how do you like make it sound like less promotional but build more trust with them? But just wondering like how did you kind of get your first like 10 customers?
Yeah. So like in the early days when we had this app that didn't have product market fit, we tried like everything under the sun to get people to use it. They weren't even customers because they weren't paying. Like we were just like, please download this free thing. And by the way, back in that time, there was no website. It was just an app. We did everything from like posting in mothers groups to asking our friends to Apple promoted us in the App Store because we like had cool artwork that they liked, and we kind of found an inroads into like an Apple rep who wanted to promote our app. So that got us lots of users. We didn't have product market fit, so it didn't matter how much we did that. Like eventually they would churn out and we weren't making any money from them. On the other hand, like when we pivoted to this daycare and preschool marketplace, in the beginning, we didn't monetize at all. We just kind of built this utility. And then over time, the daycares and preschools started coming to us. They said, you're sending us all this traffic. These were the bigger ones that were more sophisticated and could see the kind of UTM source parameter. And they also saw that we were taking impression share from them in search results. So it was actually Childcare was our very first customer. They're a massive daycare chain, the biggest, and they saw all the traffic we were sending them, and they said, we should probably work out some kind of deal because we don't want this to go away. And that was when we kind of realized like we could probably now take this to a few others, and we did. But I think like the key for me was like it didn't, getting all those users only mattered when we could. We actually had something that people were using and we had a business model. And so I kind of wish we didn't have that promotion from Apple and we didn't have like people that agreed to download it for free because it kind of gave us this false sense of like, oh yeah, people are using it and they're downloading it. And we also ran ads in the early days. Like we blew a lot of money on ads. Back then, like Facebook ads were pretty cheap. So we could get downloads pretty cheaply. I think that's changed a bit with some of the targeting stuff that's changed. But yeah, we did a lot of things that kind of showed growth, but it wasn't really useful growth.
It's a good question. Thanks. Hey, Michael, saw you jumped on or raise your hand. You want to jump on?
Yes, Sarah, thank you for taking the time and sharing your learnings here. I'm curious, you mentioned SEO being a big part of how you're acquiring the parents. Do you feel like as you grow and scale, is there like a ceiling with SEO as a primary driver of traffic? Are you now thinking like, okay, so maybe we have to go look at paid ads and maybe the economics work and now we got to pour money into that? Like, what's your thought on SEO and moving beyond SEO to scale the demand side?
Yeah, we've probably already hit the ceiling with like organic traffic. So we do a lot of SEM as well. Like our kind of math is really dialed in. Like SEO was great to get started because that was all free traffic. And then any way we monetized it was wonderful. Now, like we do care a lot more about liquidity because we can only pay to acquire a user in a market and a user that we can monetize really well. So we better have like 10 paying daycares in that market. We can't just have this like kind of some of these adjacent partners, we call them, that kind of monetize our extra demand. Like that's generally not demand we would ever pay for because we don't monetize it well. So like our math, it's like very complex now, who we can pay to acquire and how much and where and what they have to be searching for or what they have to be, we can pay more to acquire someone who's like of the preschool demographic than looking for infant care, for example, because they're a lot more valuable. But yeah, we're focused a lot more now on like brand and content marketing and SEM and kind of all these other channels, because SEO is also very unpredictable. Like there's no real formula to be like, if we do this much, we'll grow by this much. It's like, we'll take what we can get, but it's not reliable.
Great question. SEO is always a fun topic to chat through. So, well, cool. So we're almost out of time here, but thanks once again for taking the time to join us here, Sara, and everyone for the great questions. I guess last but not least, final question that we have for you here, which is if you could go right back to before you you started Winnie, what would you tell yourself about marketplaces?
It is hard and it's a long journey, and I don't know if I would have done this if I had realized like 8 years later I'd still be doing it. But I also think if I had understood like how long it takes to really build something at scale, I might have been a little bit more savvy in the beginning about how we spent our money, because we could use it now and like it's a lot more kind of any dollar we spend now, we can be so much smarter and we can get so much more for that dollar that like I wish all those dollars we threw away in the beginning to get like to Facebook ads, to get downloads, to random users, like I wish we had them now. So I probably would have told myself like it takes a while, save your money. And you'll be able to put it to good use later.
Yeah, no, that's going to be great parting advice for us here. So eight years in and just getting started. So and then where can we keep up with you or follow along at?
I'm at SM on X, formerly Twitter. Winnie is Winnie.com, like Winnie the Pooh, but just Winnie. I'm on LinkedIn, been posting a lot on there because who knows how long X will be around for. I'm on every social platform.
So thanks again for the great chat today. I know we kind of bounced around a little bit and dug into some specific kind of marketplace topics, but this is really fun, and we're of course all big fans of what you're building.